Today we are going to take a look at the 10th edition terrain rules. We are going to take a look at what changes, what kind of different terrain types we have, and what rules got removed. If you enjoy the content, consider leaving a thumbs up and subscribing, as well as checking the links down in the description below if you want to support what I do. My name is Senpai, and this is Empire of Wargames. So the terrain rules in 10th edition seem to be a lot simpler compared to 9th edition. 9th edition was a little bit of a keyword soup, as a lot of people called it, and I tend to agree. I am not a big fan of the 9th edition terrain rules, and I think what I've seen in the newest Warhammer community article, which will be linked down in the pinned comment below, is a very, very positive development when it comes to simplifying the game, making it easier to understand, but also for resolving everything in a more quick manner. Now, things like dense cover and so on are gone away with, and the only thing you can get now when you're in cover is the benefit of cover. And all it does is improve your armor characteristic against ranged attacks by 1, unless your armor save is a 3 up or better, in which case your armor save stays the same against AP0 weapons. That is important. That is a buff for AP0 weapons because they are going to be a lot more common now, and shooting with AP0 weapons against models with a save of 2+ was always incredibly frustrating because it was practically useless. So this is a clear buff to those quote-unquote rebalanced weapons that have a lot less AP, and I think that change makes it feel a little bit gamey, and is one of the very few things that feels a little bit clunky at first, but is kind of necessary in the context of realizing that Warhammer 40k needs to be less deadlier instead of more deadlier. But at the same time, AP0 weapons should not be useless, and that is what this change is for. Other than that, it is a very simple change that makes getting the benefit of cover very easy, and you always know, okay, I'm in cover and this is what I'm getting. Now, other things to consider that are important here are vehicles. Vehicles are obviously getting the benefit of cover unless they have one of the new keywords, which is always visible or towering. This includes, for example, models that are flying. Models are usually always visible, but GW is going to confirm them on those data cards. And when it comes to towering models, I fully expect knights to be there and just Lords of War and huge models and nothing else really. I think your regular rhinos or killer cans and those kinds of vehicles or walkers are still going to get the benefit of cover if you can meet all the rules of the terrain type you're standing on. Now, while we are talking about terrain types, why don't we talk about them one by one? First up, craters and rubble. Each time a ranged attack is allocated to an infantry model that is wholly on top of the terrain feature, that model has the benefit of cover against that attack. Super simple, your craters are just easy to use. It specifies that it is for infantry models, so here a vehicle obviously does not get any benefit of cover, but yeah, craters and rubble are super self-explanatory. Next up are barricades and fuel pipes, and this looks a little bit more complicated, but it's really not. It basically says each time a ranged attack is allocated to an infantry model that is wholly within 3 inches of this terrain feature, if that model is not fully visible to every model in the attacking unit because of this terrain feature, that model has the benefit of cover against that attack. Very simple, very straightforward, at least in my opinion. And the one thing that needed a little bit more of an explainer is the engagement range, which we already have in 9th edition, which basically allows you to still fight against someone who's on the other side of the pipe, and basically extends the range from 1 inch of engagement range to 2 inches. Very simple, very easy to make charges and to keep kind of a melee distance despite someone being across on the other side, because if barricades and fuel pipes would ward you from charges and melee altogether, that would obviously suck for especially melee-focused armies, and yeah, that clarification just makes a lot of sense. One thing to mention for barricades is that they basically make deep strike charges be 8 inches rather than 9 inches, but it is something that a lot of people are not aware. It was already a thing in 9th edition because a lot of tournament setups and tournament terrain setups don't use that kind of terrain. So that is something to consider whenever you're playing. And yeah, it just makes charges easier actually. The next terrain type we are going to talk about is battlefield debris. It reads, each time a ranged attack is allocated to a model, if that model is not fully visible to every model in the attacking unit because of this terrain feature, that model has the benefit of cover against that attack. Here it doesn't specify infantry or anything really. So your walkers and your rhinos and so on are probably going to get the benefit of cover here. Even though debris is going to be a little bit more annoying to cover because, you know, depending on the size of the debris, it is kind of a point of contention that you need to probably discuss with your opponent before the game starts, because there's terrain, official terrain from GW, those little crates and maybe a singular kind of barrel. And is that enough to be counted as debris? I don't know. So that is something that you probably should discuss before the game. Next up, we have hills and sealed structures, like from the Fronteris terrain or from the terrain that was included in a Moroch Kill Team box. And it reads, each time a ranged attack is allocated to a model, if that model is not fully visible to every model in the attacking unit because of this terrain feature, that model has the benefit of cover against that attack. Super simple. If you're on a hill and you're obscured and you're just higher up, you're going to be more difficult to hit. And that is basically all you need to know. You're getting the benefit of cover at almost all points. It doesn't specify infantry here at all again, and it's very simple to just, you know, apply. Next up, we are going to talk about woods, and I'm not going to read the benefit of cover part. Again, it's always the same. But the visibility part is a little bit more interesting and kind of covers what I talked about at the beginning of the video about aircraft always visible and towering. So models that are wholly within this terrain feature are never considered to be fully visible to an observing model. Similarly, if a model is not wholly within this terrain feature, must look through or over this terrain feature in order to draw a line of sight to another model, then that other model is never considered to be fully visible to that observing model. And so it will have the benefit of cover from this terrain feature. Aircraft and towering models are exceptions to this. Visibility to and from such models is determined normally, even if this terrain feature wholly is in between them and the observing model and so on. So you can always shoot on them, no matter if there are woods in between you and an aircraft or anything like that. So it's also fairly simple. If you're standing within the terrain feature, you get the benefit of cover. If someone is shooting through woods to target you, you're getting the benefits of cover, but they are also going to get the benefits of cover against you. And yeah, aircraft and towering units are exceptions for this, and even if you position them in the middle of the woods, if the base size allows that, they are not going to get any benefits here. Still a lot of text, but fairly simple. Now, while the woods rules are fairly simple, it is important to keep in mind that you're not getting any -1 to hit anymore while being in woods. That is a huge change from 9th edition over to 10th edition, especially for armies that have a low ballistic skill score to start with. For example, Tau, Orcs, and so on are going to benefit from this massively, because you are not going to go from barely being able to hit to not being able to hit at all simply because of a terrain structure. And I think that is one of the huge changes that is actually very beneficial for the game and for a lot of factions in the game that just do not have a super high ballistic score, which I consider to be 3+ actually. Anything that is 4+ or worse is kind of bad, at least in 9th edition 40k standards. So yeah, that's definitely something that we should mention here. Next up, we have ruins, and there is a little bit of a descriptive text from GW, which basically says that terrain features are still obscuring, basically the same thing that is happening in 9th edition. If you are standing within the terrain feature or within the ruins, you can shoot out of them and you can also be shot at, but you get the benefit of cover. If you are standing behind them, they count as an obscuring silhouette and you cannot target units that are not within the ruined terrain feature. That's all it basically says. It's not more complicated than that or anything. Other than that, ruins are the same as they always were. You get the benefit of cover, but there's a little bit of an additional extra which should motivate you to use the higher floors of all the different terrain features that we have available to us. It reads, plunging fire, each time a model that is wholly within this terrain feature makes a ranged attack if that model is 6 inches or more vertically from the ground level, and every model in their target unit is at ground level, improve the armor penetration characteristic of that attack by 1. Again, they need to be super specific with that, but it basically says if you're 6 inches on a terrain feature and your opponent is not, you're getting AP -1 additionally to your weapons. Super simple, cool motivation to put your snipers up high, cool motivation to put any kind of ranged unit up high, because AP is, as we've seen so far, hard to come by. So yeah, if you have terrain features that are that high, you're definitely going to at least consider making use of that, which is a cool additional rule, a cool thing to think about, and it's not too complicated to apply. One thing I wanted to add to the ruins part and the plunging fire rule is that a lot of the newer terrain that GW has released recently, like for example in the Command Edition and so on, has a height of 5 inches. So they actually want you to be on the second or third floor of your terrain features, which there are some official terrain features that have a second or third floor, but there are not a lot of them. But a lot of self-built stuff and a lot of stuff you are going to find at tournaments is definitely going to provide that kind of height for you of 6 inches or higher. So that is definitely something to keep in mind, that just a regular GW ruin with one floor is probably not going to be enough. Now there are a few things that I wanted to clarify before we wrap this video up. There were questions like, do we know what fully visible means yet? And there is a clarification in the boarding actions rule set for fully visible. It reads, if you can draw a straight line to every part of a model space from any part of an observing model space, then that model is said to be fully visible to the observing model. And that is basically it. So you have to have complete line of sight from every part of your base to every part of the enemy space or opponent space, and that is to be considered fully visible. Now, while we are talking about rules and speculations that have not been kind of discussed in the article, one thing that I'm interested in is if breachable is still a thing. It doesn't look like it, because even though breachable is a convenient rule, it causes a lot of issues, especially for cavalry units, which are probably still going to be a thing, or GW could just still enable breachable as a universal rule for all kinds of terrain types unless they are sealed structures, and just go away with the cavalry rule. It really depends, but I think cavalry units should be differentiated enough from bikers that, yeah, breachable should be kind of changed, or maybe it's gone with altogether, but I couldn't find anything regarding that in the article itself. Now, next to the breachable rule, which is arguably also a movement rule, there are a lot of other movement-based rules that are probably going to get covered, which are not covered here. Like, for example, are terrain structures going to slow you down or not? It doesn't seem like it, but we are not 100% sure yet. How are knights going to move around the battlefield, especially if there's a lot of debris on the battlefield? Are there any rules for that? And so on. There's a lot to consider, and there's still a lot to come, so keep an eye out for that. Other than that, if you have any opinions on this, if you like the simplification, if you don't like it, if you prefer the complexity of 9th edition because it offers a lot more flavor, let me know in the comments below. I would love to know what you think. Other than that, I hope this was insightful, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.